This conference will now be recorded.
All right, thank you for joining us, everybody. Today we have Malcolm Cockwell from the Halliburton Forest with us. And I wanted to start us off by talking about how we sort of connected at first. So up on my screen, you have the Cryoconite project that Tom Carrier isn't here with us today, but he and Joe and Kate and 3D Fab team have been working on this Cryoconite project, which is trying to make multiple panels and different materials, try to understand how the material properties would react to different geometries of aluminum and wood in particular that got us interested on this path. And this was all through Autodesk at the Tech Center. And building on that, we even have recently approved this new project for a new research project to try to take those previous lessons and translate it into a full robotic assembly using basically creating a linear robotic platform where you can assemble timber pieces into more complex joins. So that was actually approved to start in December, or really whenever Autodesk Tech Center opens up. It's a really exciting opportunity that we think we're going to have to really experiment with different joinery techniques and try to understand the material properties of wood as we try to make these complex joinery systems. And so through Autodesk, now that things have gone virtual, it's kind of become a larger net. And so we've started interacting with some of the people in the Toronto Tech Center. And they actually, the Mass Timber Institute recently started a residency in the Toronto Tech Center. And they connected us to Malcolm and Halliburton Forest because they saw, these two projects, but also, when you look at the types of projects that are going up that we've been talking about in this group, the UMass project, a lot of projects around Boston. This is one. Zephyr Architects is working in Nubian Square, would be the largest passive house and mass timber building in New England. Ascent Milwaukee that we've all heard about, these large mass timber projects that we're all trying to bring into our workflows, but then as we also think about sustainability and how we make that pitch for sustainability, how can we try to be more sophisticated in it? So I think Malcolm and Halliburton Forest are really at the leading edge of that discussion. I think it'll be a great hour for us to talk about it. So thank you, Malcolm, for coming and joining us. I'll make you the.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for having me. I'm just gonna figure out how to get this back up here. All right. Can you all see the beginning of the slide deck? Okay, perfect. All right. So yeah, no, thanks very much for inviting me in. I think that you're probably many steps ahead of us when it comes to how to use wood, but the focus of our business is how to produce it and how to produce it in a sustainable manner. I'm gonna try to kind of blow through the slide deck efficiently, and hopefully then we can have a discussion and we can come back to any of the points that I raise. And the two things that I'll kind of focus on during the discussion is sustainability as it applies to the forest management techniques that we employ and the wood products that we generate, and then also sustainability as it relates to the bigger picture property management and how we share our property with other users and in doing so achieve what we would consider to be social sustainability as well as economic sustainability. Before I get into it, I guess I'll give a bit more of an introduction about myself. So I'm the managing director here at Halliburton Forest. I've been in this role for about 5 years. My predecessor was the founder of the company, Peter Schleifenbaum, and following his retirement, I took over with my colleagues. I'm a registered professional forester in Ontario, so that's my training and trade. And outside of Halliburton Forest, I'm involved in the management of other large private properties that have common ownership to Halliburton Forest, as well as some other business ventures. So with that said, I will jump right into it. And the first thing that I'd want to get across is that the way that we describe ourselves is as a sustainable multi-use private land stewardship company. And I always say that each of those words would warrant a presentation in its own right. And today we're going to focus a bit more on sustainability. But when I say sustainable, I mean that what we do, we try and do it in a manner that it can be done for the very long term without degrading the property and the land that we're responsible for. Multi-use means that we do more than one thing. We're not just a timber company, and we're not just a tourism company, and we're not just a stewardship company. We're a little bit of everything. Private land means that for the most part, the property that I'll be talking about today is privately held. It's about 100,000 acres of private land, which is very unusual in Ontario. The vast majority of Canadian land is owned by the Crown. And so we're a bit peculiar in that respect. And then stewardship is a bit of a motherhood concept, but to us it means that we do what we do for more than just the economic benefits and the money and the business aspect of it. Most of my colleagues and I are here because we really not only love what we do and love our career path, but we also very deeply love the lands that we are responsible for. The map on the right gives you a sense of where we're located. Most people have heard of Algonquin Provincial Park in central Ontario, and we are effectively the southwestern neighbor of Algonquin Provincial Park. And our map's a little bit updated. We've bought a bit more property since that was last generated, but it gives you a sense of our scale relative to Algonquin Park. In terms of the land itself, it's a good place to start. And this is a photo taken around this time of year, actually, inside our property. And what you can see is that there's a lot of trees. It's mostly hardwood, which is why there's the vibrant colors. It's heavily maple dominated, hard maple specifically, also called sugar maple. The other thing you'll notice in the image is the terrain. And this is a defining feature of the Haliburton Highlands where we're located, in that there's a lot of hills. So if you're not going up, you're typically going down. There's a lot of exposed bedrock, and there's a lot of water. So within our property, we have about 100 lakes spread throughout, similar to the lake shown in this photo. I always like to show this this quick little satellite image of the main part of our property. This is only showing about 60% of the property here, but it gives you a sense of what it looks like from far, far away. And I like to show it because it gives a bit of a context to what I mean when I talk about sustainability. When you take a look at the satellite image, you see a big green blob, and to many people, that is the definition of sustainability. But when we add our road and trail network on top of it, it kind of changes the context a little bit. And it's no longer a big green blob with nothing in it. It's actually a highly accessed big green blob. And that's to say that throughout our property, we have a network of roads as well as recreational trails that give us the opportunity to manage this property. And that can mean managing it for timber production, but it can also mean managing it for fish and wildlife populations or for recreational purposes. And I'll speak about all of those as we go through. Another kind of high level concept before we get into the guts is the business model that we operate. And I don't have everything on here, but I felt it's worth kind of sharing it because it emphasizes that multi-use concept. So Haliburton Forest and Wildlife Reserve itself is the company, and we operate as two different divisions. One division is the tourism and recreation division that has a variety of operations within it that range from 350 campsites throughout the property, 35 hunt clubs. We have accommodations for 100 people at our base camp, and therefore host many large groups. We have a wolf center with a captive wolf pack, a restaurant, and a variety of other businesses. And actually, I'm happy to say that the little box there that says new business to be announced October 2020 was announced today. And we just acquired a company called Yours Outdoors, which is a bespoke experience broker located in the Haliburton Highlands that designs custom outdoor experiences for people visiting the community. On the forest product side, which is really the focus of our discussion today, our forest management operations are where everything begins. We run one of the largest forestry crews in Ontario, and that's where I started within the company. We manage our own properties, but we also offer stewardship services to other landowners, both big and small, throughout central Ontario so that they can achieve their land management objectives using our business model. We have our own research institute, and that's the connection to the Mass Timber Institute and to the University of Toronto that Anish mentioned. We currently operate 2 sawmills. If you check the news in 2 weeks, there might be a third one being mentioned. And we have a log home business, which I will speak about later. And then we have some value-added businesses as well. One produces custom furniture. The other produces canoeing paddles, kayak paddles, and related paddle products, as well as a biochar venture that produces biochar for industrial applications, not really for soil amendment retail applications, but more for the industrial side. We'll get into the details on those, but that's the high level overview of our business model. So we're going to start with the forest products division. That's the focus of the talk today, and I always like to start a talk with the forest products division by referencing our work ethic, which are the 5 key points that define how my colleagues and I work together every day. And they're in order of priority, being that we're very focused on safety, following being safe. We like to be tidy, then we like to be efficient. And once we've been those 3 things, we have the opportunity to be ambitious, and that means that we'll be able to be competitive. Typical forest for us is shown in this image. It's, as I said before, hard maple dominated, generally multi-aged, or in any case multi-sized. And so if you look at this photo, you're seeing pretty much almost all hard maple trees. There's a couple of yellow birch in the background for those that are good at tree ID, and some beech as well. And you can see different sizes of trees, and you can also see different quality of trees. So this is a very typical pre-harvest condition for us. This photo was taken in the spring, which is why you can see the ephemeral flowers, but there's no leaves on the trees. So that's the pre-harvest, and then now I'm going to go to the post-harvest. And so that's what our forests typically look like after we've gone through them and done a harvest of some kind. And I'll explain in a moment how we go from A to B. But what I'd emphasize with this image is that you can see we've retained a variety of sizes within the forest, as well as a variety of qualities. And wherever possible, we will also retain a diversity of species, with the objective of maintaining or enhancing diversity through every harvest entry. This particular forest that's shown here, that went from this before image to this after image, would have been harvested approximately 20 years ago. And our intention following this thinning would be to come in and harvest it again in 20 years. And during each of those returns, harvest approximately the same amount of timber. So the process in going from that pre-harvest condition to that post-harvest condition starts with what's called tree marking. And this is tree marking happens in the hardwoods across North America, but I find it's very common in Ontario and less common outside of Ontario. And so basically, before any tree gets cut, our foresters go into the forest and do an evaluation of the site, of the quality of the trees, the health of the trees, the diversity, so on and so forth, and other environmental considerations. And then we literally go from tree to tree with a can of spray paint and indicate which trees are going to get harvested and which trees are going to get retained. It's a rather expensive process. It adds significant cost to any given harvest, but it ensures that people with the education and incentive to improve the forest over time are the ones making the tree removal decisions, in order that our logging crews are really just focusing on how to efficiently and safely remove that timber. They're not deciding exactly which trees should be harvested. And so in this case, the orange paint or yellow paint typically means that the tree is to be cut, and implicitly all other trees are to be protected. But occasionally we'll also use blue paint if there's a special feature that needs to be protected, say a raptor nest in a tree. So once the trees have been marked, then our loggers go in, and here we have Derek Rowden, who's the GQ model of loggers at Halliburton Forest. I put a bubble there because I noticed he doesn't have his appropriate safety gear on, which is totally unacceptable, but I'm assuming it was taken off for the purposes of the photo. And this is our standard method of getting trees on the ground. We use very skilled, hardworking people like Derek with chainsaws. And the trees are notched, and then they are dropped, and they are typically dropped in a manner that as little damage as possible is inflicted on the residual stems that will be retained for the next harvest. You can see by looking at the butt of the stem that Derek has felled that it's a fairly rotten tree, and that's not uncommon for us because each of our entries into the forest is aiming to improve the forest, and therefore we take a worst first approach. And so if there is a tree that has defects, whether they are infectious or not, we'll prioritize the harvesting of that tree over the high quality tree that is more likely to improve in value or size prior to the next cut. Once the trees are on the ground, the typical method for getting them out of the forest is with cable skidders. This image shows such a piece of equipment. And we like cable skidders for two reasons. One, as I mentioned earlier, we have very challenging terrain, and the cable skidders have, as you can see at the back of this piece of equipment, a long steel cable, which means that on the big uphills, the machine can drop the load, drive up the hill, and then winch the lift up. And that prevents rutting on the trails, which means that the forest recovers faster from each harvest. We also like the cable skidders because the cable can be pulled by the logger into the forest about 100 feet, which means that the total trail coverage within the forest with the equipment is relatively limited. Of course, this presents challenges because it's very difficult work, and it's always difficult to find the skilled people who are prepared to do that work. But the environmental result is superior, and so we try to use cable skidders whenever we can. Once the tree lengths are skidded out of the forest to the landing, then we slash them up. This is one of several methods of slashing that we use, and this machine is called a slasher forwarder. And it's called a forwarder because, as you can see, it has bunks on which it can transport cut logs short distances. And it's a slasher because the head at the end of the crane is a hot saw. So it's basically a big chainsaw that can be operated by the operator sitting inside the cab. During this process, the operator's objective is to maximize the quality of the logs that are being slashed out of the tree lengths without sacrificing volume. So trying to produce as little waste as possible, but cutting the cleanest logs possible too for the sawmill. We often say in this business that this is where money is either made or lost, because you can take a very valuable tree and screw it up, or you can take a lousy tree and slash it strategically to create a lot of valuable product down the road. So that's what happens in the woods. From there, the logs go onto a log truck, and then they get transported to our sawmill. And we operate our sawmills in a rather peculiar manner in this industry. One of the things that's a bit peculiar is that our approach is that the sawmill serves the forest. And so, the forest is managed to, let's say, optimize the sustainability objectives within, and then the sawmill deals with whatever it gets. And we don't have a sawmill manager running into the woods saying, black cherry prices are really hot these days, go cut all the black cherry. The foresters make those decisions, and then the sawmill processes whatever it receives. The other thing that we do at our sawmill that's perhaps a little bit different from many others is we're very focused on measuring and continuous improvement. And it's not fancy algorithm derived continuous improvement. It's quite simple. And an example is here where as logs come into the mill, we will with great frequency lay all them out, measure them, evaluate them, and make sure that they are in spec, so that we can be as efficient as possible inside the mill. And this is just an example where there were a large number of short logs, and so having scaled that load, the logger would be informed that the logs were cut short. He would probably be penalized in some way, and then we would work together to make sure that mistake did not happen, because mistakes in the logs result in wasted resources, and that's not acceptable from a sustainability point of view or from a business point of view. Another thing that we do is we operate our log yard quite aggressively and almost as a separate business unit from the sawmill itself. And we operate our sawmill on the principle that you run a sawmill to make money, not to make lumber. And there are often other facilities that are going to be better than you at processing a given grade or size of log. And so once the logs come into the mill yard, they'll often be sorted, and it's not infrequent for us to have a sort where we will end up selling a log from our own yard to another facility. And this is an example of that, where a particular customer was willing to pay a price that justified us not processing these logs ourselves and actually selling them to a different facility. And that's a big part of our business model, where, as I said, the sawmill is there to make money, not to make lumber, and we try to find the most efficient home for every quality and size of log that we cut. This is an overview or overhead view of one of our sawmills. This is our older sawmill, and it's a pretty standard operation. There's nothing too high tech within it. I see the yard's pretty empty in this photo, so I'm not sure what was going on there, but this is one of them, and this one is located in Haliburton County, and our other sawmill is located in the Almaguin Highlands in South River, Ontario, about 2 hours away from here. Inside the sawmill, we cut a wide variety of products, and the hardwood lumber business is typically random width, random length, and that is exactly what we do. Our products range from what we would call industrial materials that are used for pallet, truck flooring, and especially railway ties is a major product group for us, to higher end products that would be what we call appearance grade, and that would be used for residential flooring, cabinetry, furniture, and related applications. As the lumber comes out the mill, it's not a great photo for illustrating the process, but as the lumber comes out the mill, it is graded by a certified grader standing on the green chain, and that grader would be evaluating every board in the context of the grading rules that are set by the National Hardwood Lumber Association, and then as he grades them, speaking into a microphone with the dimension and the grade of each product, that it's automatically assigned to a PO, and so that at the end of every day we can account for every piece of wood that came out of the mill, and thereby measure the mill's performance, but also stay very much on top of how we're using the resource. In addition to the sawmill, I mentioned briefly that we have some value-added wood processing facilities, and one of them is our paddle shop. And I won't go into a lot of detail now, but suffice it to say that some of the lumber, and especially the specialty lumber that comes out of the sawmill, we will direct that to our paddle shop, where we have 1 or 2 people working full time, and we produce high-end specialty paddles. In this case, I can see that Ray is producing a laminate bent shaft paddle, which would be a racing paddle typically. In addition to that, we also have a wood shop which operates under a different brand with a partner. It's called Living Woodwork, and it's right down the road from our sawmill. And there again, a lot of specialty products that come out of the mill are diverted, and they go to this shop which focuses on custom woodwork. And the people there will produce anything from custom furniture like bookshelves and board tables and chairs and whatever, to bigger installations in people's homes like staircases and cabinets and such things. The other value-added business that I'll quickly mention is our log home business, and we produce about 25 to 30 log homes a year. We produce the kits. We don't actually build the homes ourselves. We sell the kits to the customer, who then retains a contractor to build it. But this is an example of the homes that we produce, and it's a funny fit for a forest management and sawmill focused company like ourselves. But it works well because this entire log home business that we operate is consuming our hemlock, and hemlock is a species that we produce a fair amount of. It's our most common softwood, and there's a very limited market for hemlock in our region. And so my predecessor wisely, on the principle that the sawmill serves the forest, realized that we had to find a market for this stuff because the forest was producing it. And rather than just accepting losses on producing lumber from it, he invented a log home product that could use the hemlock efficiently, and that's how we still use all of our hemlock to this day. I always like to take a moment to talk about the research that we do within Haliburton Forest. So a couple of years ago, we organized all of our research activities to create what we call a research institute, and there's one full-time employee that's the director of the institute. Across our property, we have hundreds, if not thousands, but certainly hundreds of permanent sample plots that on a regular interval, being 5 years, we go back in and we remeasure those plots to see how the forest is growing, dying, recovering, improving, or declining. And with that data, we're able to continuously evaluate our management methods and see if we can do better, or if we need to respond to natural disasters or other challenges that we face in the forest. Many of these research projects are also done in partnership with the University of Toronto Fleming College, Queen's University, and other research institutions in Ontario. And it's a very exciting and very important part of our business model that we invest in research and benefit from it, but also contribute to the broader scientific understanding of how forests work in this region. In addition to that, I'll briefly mention that we also do a lot of public outreach, and the most common method for that is tours. We host public tours throughout the year for stakeholders of all kinds. In this particular photo, I'm leading a tour with a bunch of master's students from the University of Toronto. We find that that's an important part of what we do from call it a social sustainability point of view, but also from an economic sustainability point of view, because frankly, when you give a tour or when you give a talk like this, you'll often be asked questions that force you to be honest and help you get better as a company over time. And it also makes you show people what you're doing so that you stay on the righteous path of forest management. I'll also mention that within the Forest Products Division, we are certified by the Forest Stewardship Council as sustainable. We were the first company in Canada to be certified as sustainable under the standards of the Forest Stewardship Council. And the certification requires us to work towards the standards of FSC. But in addition to that, we go through an audit every year when the auditor, who is the individual on the right of this photo, comes in and does a fairly thorough inspection of all of our operations, checks all the harvest blocks, and then also does interviews with stakeholders in the community, as well as with our employees and our independent contractors. And in this case, this photo captures that well, where the auditor privately, I'm zoomed in on my camera taking this photo, the auditor privately is having a conversation with the logging contractor, presumably asking him questions like, are you paid fairly? Do they ever try to get you to do something that's not good, that you're not okay with? Do they behave honestly, and so on? And that auditing procedure is important to drive our continuous improvement when it comes to sustainability. So that's the quick and dirty of the Forest Products Division, and I'm sure we'll discuss it during the question point. But I'll give you a quick overview as well of our Tourism and Recreation Division, because it's very central to how our company functions and how we manage our property here. You'll note that when I introduced the Forest Products Division, I mentioned our work ethic. Tourism has a very different culture than the Forest Products Division. So on this side of the company, we don't have a work ethic, we have shared values. But they are similar in principle, and that's that, first and foremost, we want to be safe, we want to be collaborative, and we want to be professional. And if we can be all those three things, then we will make sure that we are productive, and we'll have every reason to take pride in what we do. Our tourism division, as I mentioned earlier, has a wide variety of operations within it. So I'm just going to kind of give the highlights here. And one of the highlights, and it's on my mind because we're getting close to dog sledding season. It hasn't quite snowed here yet, but we had frost this morning and it was frozen ground. Is dog sledding. And so we've been running dog sledding here for decades, and we have about 125-ish huskies that we maintain in our kennel, full-time staff that take care of them throughout the year. And then during the winter, we run dog sledding tours. And in the past, we've hosted races, and in fact, in 2017, we hosted the World Dog Sledding Championships, which was great fun. In addition to dog sledding during the winter, we also offer snowmobiling. And we are the world's largest private snowmobiling operation on the 400 kilometers of trails and roads that we have within our property. This is very important for our business model because it allows us, unlike many other forest products companies, to use the same roads that we use for forest management for tourism and recreation purposes as well. And in doing so, conceptually, we're able to double down in terms of our business model and generate more revenue per acre or per kilometer of road. Because when that road is not being used, say during parts of the winter, for forest management purposes, we're able to use it for purposes like this. It also allows us to keep more staff engaged with the company throughout the year so that we have dedicated full-time employees as opposed to more transient seasonal ones. During the summer, one of the big activities that we offer is our canopy tour, also called the Walk in the Clouds, and it's an elevated walkway through an old growth white pine forest. It's the longest of its kind in the world, and it's an opportunity not only to give clients a bit of exposure to the forest, but also to educate them. And our guides, both when it comes to dog sledding, snowmobiling, as well as the canopy tour, are quite knowledgeable about forest ecology and why and how we manage the forest the way we do. And in doing so, then they're able to educate clients over the course of a tour. We also host special events, and one of the highlights has always been the Forest Festival. We have a number of venues across the property where we can host it, including an old sawmill building, but also an amphitheater that's built onto one of our lakes. And we've had some pretty good talent over the years. I don't know if it'll mean much to folks in Boston, but people like Jim Cuddy from Blue Rodeo played at a recent festival. Big thing for all of us is fishing and hunting. Pretty much everybody up here participates in those kinds of activities, and fishing's a big one for us, especially because it's one of our key stakeholder engagement programs, wherein we have a Halliburton Forest Fishing Society, and any member of the public can make a contribution of $25, and then with that $25, Halliburton Forest matches the $25, and all of that money goes into in some cases rehabilitating natural brook trout populations in some of our target lakes, and also establishing some put, grow, and take lakes where we can concentrate the fishing pressure in order to alleviate the pressure on the lakes that we want to keep as natural as possible. I mentioned earlier our wolf center, and so within Halliburton Forest, there's approximately 7 wolf packs that use the property, and they do their thing in the wild, and we try not to bother them. Although we do see them from time to time, which is always kind of cool. But we also have a captive wolf pack within a 15-acre enclosure and a wolf center that's built onto it. And that's a tourist experience that people can participate in. And we treat it as an educational experience so that clients can come in, and the entire purpose of the center is to educate them on the nature of wolves in this region, and also to explain how we manage for their habitat. And seeing these wolves chowing down on a dead beaver is a good segue to describe the fact that we have a restaurant as well. And the restaurant's an interesting kind of merging of the cultures of this community as well as this company, because within our restaurant, it's always kind of cool to see that you get all kinds, whether it's the logger that's just been out in the bush all day falling trees, or the guy working at the sawmill piling lumber, or a tour guide that's just taking out a tour, or a client that is probably fairly affluent and from downtown Toronto. It's a neat kind of mix of people that come into this establishment. And then I'll just wrap up the presentation part of it by saying that I started off by explaining the stewardship angle, and that many of us are here and doing what we do not only because of the career opportunity in the business, but also because we just simply love it. And a lot of what we do, my colleagues and I on this property, and the businesses that we run and the business that we're building here, is so that we can do exactly what this dude sitting on a dock is doing. And it's because we want to protect this 100,000-acre chunk of private land for the very long term, and create a business model that's sustainable in every way, including economically sustainable, so that nobody is ever tempted to divvy up this property into development lots or to turn it into something that it shouldn't be. We want to keep it intact, and we want to keep it functional, so that we can do exactly this while ensuring its sustainability and generating meaningful economic benefits. And that is the very quick blow through of this presentation that I wanted to share. And I think I managed to do that in about half an hour, and so probably a good time to jump to some questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Malcolm.
You're welcome.
Anybody out there have questions? I've got some, but Brian Scott, do you have a question?
I sure do. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
So Malcolm, this is a topic that I'm just sort of getting interested in, but I've started looking into forest management and looking at the possibility of land acquisition or somehow participating personally in this, kind of in what I'm calling my third 30. So I turned 60 about a year ago, and so this last 30 years, this is an activity or an endeavor that I think is, it's a crucial piece of stewardship, globally, and the model that you're creating, the sustainable model for maintaining, managing, and at the same time harvesting, I think is going to be key. And my question for you is, what is the minimum size of aggregate forest acreage that you think you could run this model successfully on? I mean, a forest needs to be a certain size, contiguous block, and I have no idea what that is, and whether there are still opportunities in the United States to replicate what you're doing.
That's a good one. Yeah, no, that's one of those questions I'm talking about. I've never been asked that before. It's an interesting question. So I'll spitball. So we're 100,000 acres. We're big here. That's 400 square kilometers. I have no idea what that is in miles for you people, but whatever. This business model doesn't have to be on a property this big. One of our sister properties is 10,000 acres, which is still pretty damn big. But anyway, it's 10,000 acres. It's about an hour away from here, called Limberlost Forest. Operates under a different business model in a sense, but same concept. Doesn't have to be that big either, though. I mean, the simple answer would be to say it depends on what your objectives are, but that's kind of a cop out. I'm going to try and actually answer it. There's a guy not far from us here that he's got his property for sale right now, and we've talked to them. We're probably not going to acquire it. It's too expensive. But he's at about 1,000 acres, and he makes a living off his 1,000 acres, and it's a really interesting example of subsistence multi-use forest management. I don't mean subsistence in that kind of derisive way. I mean it in a good way. In that this individual, he's got a long-term lease on his property. So there's a tower, like a cell phone tower type thing, and that generates a bit of revenue every year. Mm-hmm. I don't know if he arranged that or how that ended up being there, but it's there. He's got a relationship with a local ski club that, the provincial ski entity that has trails within the property, and they pay a reasonable lease per year. Sorry?
That's cross country or downhill?
Yeah, cross country. That's right. Yep, cross country, and they maintain it. He's got a hunt club on it that he leases his property to as well during the big game hunting season here, which is around this time of year until mid-November. And then he does a little bit of forest management himself. He's got a small piece of equipment, and by a little bit, I mean like he probably works 2 months a year doing it. And with those 4 or 5 activities, this guy actually makes a decent living. It's amazing, and it's really not hard to imagine other people doing that if they really gathered the lifestyle and did it. So he's on 1,000 acres. I think you could turn the dials and pull the levers and change that business model a bit and pull it off on a couple of hundred. But that's where I would say it kind of depends on what your objectives are and what kind of a living is one trying to make. But multi-use forest management can exist on 100 acres. It doesn't have to be 100,000. It's there's so many ways to use a property while protecting its integrity that but that's a good one. I'm going to chew on that one. That's a good question. That's an interesting one to reflect on.
This is a quick follow-up. I don't want to commandeer this, but what are if you're in a smaller acreage, 1,000, 100, are there necessary adjacency requirements? Like, do you have to be part of a bigger forest, or could you literally be an isolated 100?
Yeah, it depends, I guess, on the jurisdiction you're in, but certainly in Ontario, you can be an isolated 100, absolutely. 100-acre lot's the standard property size around here, and there are, that's definitely a possibility.
Good.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that works in your guys' neck of the woods. I know in places like Maine, it tends to be in bigger chunks, like the northern portion of Maine, but be regional.
Fantastic, thank you.
So I'm curious, what is your what does an end of year statement for Halliburton Forest look like? Because you have all these multiple uses, right? Like how do you balance all these different variables against each other? Like you're trying to balance the number of wolves, but then you also have hardwoods and you're trying to mill lumber. Like how do you balance even the more subjective things versus your more objective things when you're trying to lay out, what you're investing your time in and your efforts in?
Yeah, we're still figuring that one out, to be honest. Like we've never every year that, at least since I've been in this role, every year that we've sat down to do an operating plan for the following year, two things have happened. One is every year we've sat down to do the operating plan, we've done it completely differently from the previous year. So like, if you look at our operating plans, it's like a totally different group of people did them, even though it was the same people every year. It's just we changed and the property changed and the world changed and whatever. Um, uh, what was the other thing I was going to say there? Oh yeah, the other thing is that every year our board of directors is asked for a 5-year business plan or projection, and I've weaseled my way out of providing that every single year and said no, it's too dynamic. Things are changing too fast. We're growing too quickly. I could make it up for you if you want, but I'd be making it up, and you don't want that, and I don't want that. And so I've managed to get it. I know that this year I'm not going to get away with it though. But so I guess to answer your question, I don't really have a great answer to it. What I will say is that right at the beginning of dividing the company into two, that was a fairly controversial thing that we did when my colleagues and I took over here. Prior to that, the tourism and the forest products operations had been all kind of mixed in, where an employee could show up any given day and not know if they were going to be piling lumber at the sawmill or feeding a wolf. And that was, that worked for some people and it definitely didn't work for others. So splitting the company into two, at least we got the two main, I wouldn't even say the two main businesses, but the two main business cultures kind of working on themselves, and they relate to each other, sure, but you've got very different people that work in a tourism stewardship kind of business than you do that work in a forest products business. So getting that split up helps. So when we plan our year and plan our operations and our finances, it's done at least with that division. And then we do break it down by business unit. I find that as we get better at the measurement of, certainly on the forest products anyway, the measurement of performance, like really focusing on a small number of very important KPIs, that starts to kind of guide our thinking better. But the balance we're trying to find, and I'll be very honest in saying this, is how do you, with all the diversity that we've got, the sum is greater than the whatever it is. The whole is worth more than the sum of the parts, and it's being able to nail those KPIs and wrap our heads around them without losing the magic of what has the whole thing together. Because if you try and boil down this company, or really any company that's kind of like this, to delivered cost per ton of saw logs, lumber recovery rate within the mill, overrun percentage, average grade recovery, like you're going to start to lose that magic, because something like the Research Institute, which feeds into the canopy tour guides knowledge and the quality of the tour there, which contributes to the type of people showing up at the restaurant, you start to lose that magic. So we're still figuring that one out.
I was going to also ask, does your research group have any, because I've had like conference calls about like soil carbon levels and stuff like that. And I think it's still kind of a confusing topic for me, at least. I don't know. Do you guys have any research you guys have done on soil carbon levels, especially when you cut things down? How much is released? How much of the carbon do you think is actually stored in the soil? And
Yes.
Is there a way to manage it with like sustainable forestry somehow?
Yeah, we have several research projects currently, as well as past ones that have been wrapped up on that topic. The fellow that you reached out to originally, Adam Gorgolewski, he's the head of our research institute, and that's actually exactly what his PhD thesis is on. And so he's actually our in-house expert, so to speak, on that. I won't spit out the data on this call, first of all, because it's kind of dry, and secondly, because I don't actually know it off the top of my head. But if you folks are interested in that type of thing, we'd be happy to share the data. That's kind of an underpinning of our research institute, is that it's totally open. All of our data is available for anybody to play with if they wish.
Yeah, that'd be awesome to look at, for sure.
Yeah, and if there's interesting results in there, Adam's found that that an anecdote that is quite easy to chew on and kind of interesting is, I mentioned during the presentation that one of our strategies is this take the worst first approach, right? We want to, when we go into the forest, we see a rotten, shitty tree that's not going to appreciate in value or in size over time. Typically, we want to remove that tree and make space for a higher quality tree to take its place over time. Adam has found that those trees, once you cut them down, they actually become, big sources of methane. And so there's some kind of balancing act at some point, once the numbers get run properly, that some of those bigger, uglier trees, you might actually be better off keeping them, even though they're suppressing the younger trees from coming up, because in cutting it down, it's a methane source. So there's some interesting stuff like that that informs our operations as we learn it.
Have you seen any change in the rate of rotten trees?
No, I can't say we have. I mean, I think over time the quality of this property has increased quite dramatically. The quality of trees within the property, that is, and by over time I mean since like the 70s, 80s. That's mostly due to my predecessor. He gets credit for that, because he's a forester, raised and trained in Germany, which has a long history of good forest management, of course, and he brought kind of European principles of forest management here, in the 70s, 80s, and so there's been 3 rotations ish, across this property of really good scientific management, and as a result, the number of, generally speaking, rotten trees has declined. With that said, though, I will mention that invasive species. I didn't mention that during the presentation at all, but invasive species is a huge challenge for us, as it is for any land manager in North America. And the big invasive species that we're dealing with right now is called beech scale or beech bark disease, and it's a scale insect and a canker that kills American beech trees, which is a major part of our forest, and that is resulting in a very high level of mortality and therefore a very high level of rot, across our property. It's a big problem.
But you're not seeing any changes in temperature causing more disease and pathology?
Climate change? No. We do, yeah, no. Climate change does not rank at the top of our list of environmental concerns. I'm not a denier or anything like that. Don't get that impression, but it's not something that we feel is particularly well understood in the first place. Its impact on forests is not well understood. At a fairly simple level, this property will probably benefit a lot from what some of the climate change models are proposing, frankly. So that hasn't concerned us too much. Invasive species are definitely a higher ranking issue. With that said, though, we do have some current research projects underway to help us mitigate negative impacts of climate change if they do emerge. The best example I'd give is assisted migration trials, where we've planted various species that are currently here, as well as species that grow south of us, in kind of a structured setting, so that we can evaluate how those trees from different seed zones and those different species grow over time in a changing climate.
Interesting. I mostly brought up because there's some recent concern that Massachusetts is experiencing greater rates of disease in its forest, ostensibly due to higher temperatures.
That's interesting. Okay.
Ottawa, I mean, but you're still a bunch north. But it's interesting that you think that in some ways it would benefit you because and I guess there's also a question, so you'd see a changeover to more deciduous trees rather than coniferous trees.
Yeah, exactly. We're in a funky transitional zone here. Like, we're right at the northern end of the hardwoods of North America. You go 100 kilometers or whatever north of here, and you're out of the hardwood for the most part. Like, you're into the boreal, spruce, pine dominated kind of forest. So we're right at the end of it. And the hardwoods that grow here have a pretty hard time as a result. A warmer, and the models show a wetter climate for this region anyway. So a warmer, wetter climate up here would actually probably be, at face value. I don't want to pretend we're cheerleaders for climate change, but at face value would actually not be that problematic. But at the same time, though, our soil conditions here are garbage compared to what would exist throughout the rest of the hardwood region. So that will continue to be a limiting factor for us.
Interesting.
To take that full circle, though, I'll throw out a concept that we spitball about it within our team. We won't pretend to understand it, but we do talk about it, and it's how that will affect the product recovery that occurs. So I mentioned that we're at the northern range of the hardwoods. That means that our hardwoods have a pretty tough life, which means they're typically lower quality than a hard maple growing in Haliburton County is a lower quality hard maple for the most part than one that's growing in upstate New York, say. As a result of that, our sawmill here right down the road, it's probably cutting 30% railway ties. Like 30% of the wood coming out of that mill is railway ties, because that's what makes sense for the lower quality, the rougher timber that we're putting into it. You go to upstate New York, it might be 5% railway ties and a whole lot more grade lumber. And so if, this is, now we're getting into conjecture, but like if climate change affects how the trees grow, it's not that crazy to think that 80 years from now, which is only 2 rotations, from a forester's point of view, in the forest, the products that are coming out of our mill could be very different from what they are today, because the trees could grow better, and therefore railway ties may not be the appropriate product group. We might be producing thick stock lumber for high grade furniture instead. So it's kind of a neat thought that there's going to be a supply chain impact of it, positive or negative for everybody.
Yeah.
You guys consult for other forests, right? And have you consulted for like any forests in like New England or northern United States?
No. So Halliburton Forest is the main property here. We own another 10,000 acre property a little bit west of here, and then we own 145,000 acre property in the Boreal region. So like 7 hours north of here, like north of the Arctic watershed type thing, like way up north. That's mostly spruce. Then we started what we call stewardship services, and the role of stewardship services is pretty local to Central Ontario. All of our clients are in Ontario. We don't do forest management outside of that. Separate from Halliburton Forest, I'm involved with a company that operates in New Brunswick and Maine, but that's a totally separate thing. So far our forest management's just in this neck of the woods.
Malcolm, there's a factoid that gets put out in the context of mass timber building construction, where they say that for a typical mid-sized multifamily building, that the North American forests are growing that amount of timber every 3 minutes. Can you put that in perspective in terms of which forests and where that's actually happening and how you actually get to that wood and recover it and get it to a building site? Yeah,
that's big picture stuff. I'll throw it there right off the bat. I totally believe that number. The forests of North America, despite everything can be done better, we're still figuring it out, whatever. But on the whole, forest management across North America is actually really quite good at a global scale anyway, and certainly light years ahead of where it would have been a generation ago. And so there's more trees growing than there were before, and they're growing under better conditions and better management than they were before. So I've heard that number too, and I believe it. I believe it all the way. In terms of where the wood baskets are, let's bust the wood business into 2. You've got hardwood and softwood, because they're very different things and they're used for different purposes. Hardwood, as I've said on this call, it's typically a rough green product that's being produced for non-structural purposes. Mass timber accepted. That's a new thing that's still being, that market's being developed, and you guys are playing a key role in that, and that's awesome. But other than railway ties and shoring timbers, a lot of the hardwood is really going to things like furniture, flooring, and non-construction purposes. So that's hardwood, and hardwood's a peculiar one. I mean, you're basically looking at like Florida to where I'm sitting right now. Like we're right at the northern edge of it, east to the East Coast, and west to maybe like Minnesota, kind of. But not really, Wisconsin, sure, but not really too far past that. Like it doesn't go very far west. And so hardwood's a pretty specialty. And that's not all hardwood either. There's a lot of softwood in there, but it's a pretty, relatively small piece of the bigger forest puzzle. Softwood then, the big timber baskets, at least as I understand it, is you've got that whole kind of south central Canadian belt. So you've got, your Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick kind of big softwood basket. You've got the southern US, so your Florida, Alabama, Georgia, that big timber basket, and then you've got the Pacific Northwest. And that's probably the biggest one, I would guess, but I don't actually know that for a fact. My understanding is that the age profiles are such that there's a lot of wood coming on in the southern US. over the coming decades, and that's why you're seeing a lot of mill construction in that part of the world. Yeah, those are the big timber baskets, and I'm not an expert on that kind of macro stuff, but I definitely believe that figure that there's a lot of wood growing in this continent.
Great, thanks.
So the tours look awesome, and I
Yeah.
wish that Americans were allowed in Canada right now, because then it would definitely bring this group over there. But for like
Hey,
a
once
group like us that's interested in forestry, like what would you recommend if we just like found a forest? Like what should we do? I don't know. What's like a good way to like get, I don't know, like, or do you know any forests in New England that we should probably go to? You know a guy in Maine?
You know, I can't say I've been to very many in that part of the world, but it's been on my to-do list for a long time. But yeah, I'll follow up with you. I'll send you a couple of leads. I don't know them personally, but people that I would, if I were coming down and I wanted to learn a bit more and get a bit more exposure, who I would look up. Yeah, there's actually a group not too far from you guys, and I do understand that they're kind of like us, kind of like they do a bit of outreach, and they do good management. I'll send you some of that information. You can try and follow up with them. But you know what I'd also suggest is like, I mean, well, I look at it from a weird perspective because I'm a forester, so I probably have a funny list of priorities, but I think the most important part of wrapping your head around the entire forestry sector is just understanding how the trees grow, because it's a surprisingly not well understood part of the puzzle. There's a lot of people that own or run sawmills or manage forests that don't actually understand how trees function. And the best resource for that I would recommend, and I literally keep the book on my bedside table. It's by an American guy named Alex Shigo. He was deputy chief forester of the U.S., if I remember correctly, and his seminal work is called A New Tree Biology. And like, I think you people, like architecture type people, will find that book absolutely fascinating. And the thing that's wonderful about it is Shigo tells the story of how trees grow the right way, and that every page is a photo about this big with 2 sentences. And the next page is a photo about this big with 2 sentences. And there's 400 pages of that. And what he did that was so different from everybody else over the course of his career was he had an academic background, but then he went into the woods with a chainsaw and he cut trees longitudinally, and he took pictures of how they were growing. And that changed how people think about how trees grow. So that would be my pitch. Unfortunately, he's dead, so you can't talk to him, but you can definitely read his book. It's a good read.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely have to check it out.
Yeah.
Well, if we don't have any more questions, I think we'll call it for today. We're at 12. But thank you, Malcolm, for coming in. Thank you, everybody else, for coming and attending. It's a great session.
It's great.
I have a recording and I'll post it on.
Thanks for having me. And I think my email was on there. It's info@Halliburton-Forest. Feel free to, if anybody has a follow-up question or whatever, feel free to send it in, and keep up the good work getting mass timber to become a real thing. The entire forestry sector, hardwood, softwood across North America, is cheering for you. Get it going. It's important for all of us. The most important, I'll say one more thing. This is my final soapbox speech. Is the most important thing for sustainable forest management, I didn't mention it on the presentation, I should have, is having good markets for low quality wood. And I'm not saying that mass timber is low quality wood, but it doesn't care about grade, is my understanding when it comes to hardwood. We've looked a little bit into hardwood CLT and related products. It doesn't care about color. That's what I'm getting at. And that to us is a market for lower grade wood. You want to have sustainable forestry, you got to have markets for those products. And sometimes it's a challenging market. And the more markets that develop for that, the better the forest will be managed. So as you try and pitch mass timber to people, tell them like creating a market for that product group is good for the forests, because it creates an extra market for that lower end that may not typically find its way into furniture or cabinetry. So keep up the good work.
Awesome.
Thanks, Malcolm.
Okay.
Thank you,
See you later. Thank you.